We can see that they talk to us. I talk to it every day. I love it. I talk, yes, you have to talk to your plants because they talk to us back. It is, well, we have all our garden here. We have fruits, we have herbs, we have camará, we also called massa peixe in Portuguese. This is a banana. It's a garden banana, it's called. It's just seeds. My connection is that I was born in this ranch, in this rural area, planting since I was very little. I guess it's, I don't know, it's like a gift. You plant it with love. If you plant without love, it won't work. If you turn your back to your plants, it will die. If every day you have to talk to it, you have to bring some water. I can have a garden even at the beach, I promise you. And when it's time to work, I will go to 7 in the morning until 1 a.m., depending on the day, working to prepare everything for our garden. I bring in light. And then when everything is ready, I will let nature do its part. And then I'll just work until 8 just to water my garden. If it doesn't rain, I have to water it, of course. If not, I'll just let the rain do it for me. Poison is, I don't use any kind of pesticide. I just use a coconut soap. I use vinegar. I prepare a tea. And then I will just use that instead of a pesticide. It's all natural. For us, summer, oh, we used to have lots of plants in summer, but now we don't anymore. It's changed in 30, 40 years. We would plant everything. Now we can only plant during winter because it's just too hot, too humid. Do plants talk among themselves? Yes, they do. They do. Everything is a living being. If you plant it here. If it feels weak and shriveled, the other one is right next to you and it's looking beautiful. She said, well, take me out of here because I look ugly. You have to take it from there and take it so that it feels beautiful. And plants talk to us too because we care for it. The Ministry of Tourism and Associação Casa Azul present the 19th Literary Festival of Paraty. It's a project that has the tax benefit of the culture law and Vale Mais Cultura. We have the official sponsorship by Itaú and the Cultural Institute Vale. Production, Casa Azul, the Special Secretary for Culture, Ministry of Tourism, Brazil, Federal Government.
Essa mesa é ao vivo e é transmitida em
This is a live transmission in 3 channels on the internet. We have the original audio, Portuguese and English. Just choose on the lower part of your screen what is your preferred language. Questions to the authors might be submitted throughout our transmission through the chat box on YouTube. At the end of this meeting, good evening. I am Anabela. I am a journalist and I am a cultural programmer, and I study Machado de Assis. I have never gone to the Amazon. I have never gone to Canada, but one day I will. It is an immense pleasure to be again participating in a flip, unfortunately now from Lisbon. Thank you for the curators for having invited me. And this allows me to bring together one of the branches of the tree that I am to this forest, to belong to this forest, and to reflect on urgent planet issues based on Margaret Atwood's work and the research done by Antonio Nobre. I will do a brief presentation of both authors, not a biographical presentation or of their professional history, but just bringing words that seem to be the heart, the lungs, the roots, the trunk, the veins of your creative presence and vital presence. Uh, Utopia, dystopia, Ustopia, totalitarian governments, fanatism, oppression, women's rights, uh, genealogy, transmission, legacy, fertility, and drought, human physiology, blood, water. Amazon as a power plant of environmental services, a galaxy of different systems, society, health, and disease. We could talk for hours and hours of each one of these words or concepts, but we will start by a seed, maintaining all the metaphor of plants, to think about renewal, change, the flow in time, the knowledge and the lessons of natural systems. Margaret Atwood and Antonio Donato Nobre. Hello, such a pleasure to be here with you today. Margaret, in the first page of Oryx in Grex, there is a clock that doesn't work, and everything is in white. There are no hands, and you don't know what time it is. This absence of time, chronological time, is very disturbing, especially if we consider that plants are a measure of time. They are life, and there is a beginning, an end, a birth, and a death. To be outside of time, is it the first step to have the creation of individuality, reality, and even the beginning of alienation?
Well, um, human beings invented clocks, and nature doesn't have clocks that natural creatures have to look at because they have their own sense of time, which is not dependent on some hands on a piece of metal. So we invented clocks. It's entirely a human thing. And when the character in Oryx and Crake doesn't have a clock, he therefore has to align himself with natural time rather than looking to the kind of human clock time that we invented in the 19th century, essentially so trains could run on time and not bump into each other. It's one of the reasons we did it. We had sundials before that, and we knew about moons and seasons, but we didn't have minutes and seconds that had to match up. We did that because we had made technology that required it, and that's why we do a lot of things. But nature doesn't need to do that. Yes, it's true. Would I lie to you?
Bom, nós contamos com a
Well,
sua invenção.
We will count on your creativity, your inventiveness, and not with your lies, but with the fantasy, certainly. So, Antonio, I have with me two presents here. I have palm trees, plants. These they grew during the pandemic, and I have a work by the Brazilian artist Yuli Anastasakis. It is a espada de São Jorge. It is a plant, and it has the inscription "Protection for Dark Times." There are different layers in this work. There is the symbol of the plant itself, and it is a sword. It has a symbol of São Jorge, King George, who killed the dragon. Saint James, I'm sorry, who killed the dragon. And also Anulis Asasaki, the artist, started to uh, uh, prepare this work after Bolsonaro came to power. So, for scientists from the Amazon to care for the planet, is that the only way out in dark times? And who will protect the plants that are so threatened?
Anabela, thank you for your question and for your inspiration. By the way, plants, they exist and have for ages. We wouldn't have oxygen to breathe without them ever since the formation of the earth itself billions of years ago. So the fact that plants have the power that they have and act invisibly takes us out of our consciousness. So we need the help of artists and poets to bring these beings, spectacular beings, into our conscience. The alligator plants, Espada de São Jorge in Portuguese, is an excellent example of this mediation. So I would cite another one, which is the inspiration of the spirits of the forest. All of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon and outside the Amazon. Let's talk about the indigenous peoples of the world. They have the Inuits in Canada, or the First Nations in other continents, except for Europe, which I think has lost virtually all of its indigenous peoples. They have this connection to nature via spirituality. They understand something which is beyond the atoms and molecules, although science can quite appropriately map and write, count, and tell, analyze, reduce. It loses in this process the understanding of the emerging property of life, which the spirits taught the ancestral peoples ever since immemorial times. This loss of understanding of this connection of this whole, the articulation of life to our benefit and that of life itself, therefore ours, is the origin of what I understand of all this. The loss, this connection is the dystopia. So the plants are powerful examples of a activity, wonderful activity done silently without egotism, because then a plant or a tree is operating. It releases oxygen. It's removing CO2. It's releasing wonderful aromas and scents, which make our souls sing, with flowers attracting the birds and the bees to produce wood, timber, and all of these services in an abundant and free way. And they offer this to all the other beings and who depend on them for this to exist here on the tip of Gaia. This thin layer covering the earth, allowing us to breathe and woke up every morning at sunrise and to sleep at sundown, which are spectacles. They're a kaleidoscope. Life, the day is like a kaleidoscope. There's no day identical to another. There are no species that are identical to others. The art itself, in my understanding, is a manifestation of this kaleidoscope, this marvelous kaleidoscope of life, which enriches us.
So the question: who will protect the plants that are that are being threatened?
Who protects the plants that are threatened? I think, like the alligator plants,
because here we have St. James'
Jorge.
sword. It's also a plant in Portuguese.
But who protects the
Espada de São
plants?
Jorge. Who will protect
The alligator plants protect us, but the plants can only be protected today in this dystopia that we're living on a planetary scale, why conscience is the only way for the understanding of something which is unknown. It is unknown for most people, and I always say, always hear that which the eyes don't see, the heart does not feel. So all underlying processes of life which have us to be able to inhabit this planet, which is the only one, it's unique. We don't know any other planet with this capacity for life. It's exercised by plants and by all organisms, animals, everything that's alive. awareness of this and the consciousness of it can reach people, as happened recently. The American billionaire, he got on a rocket and went out into space and looked from out there, and something, what happens with the astronauts, they call it the Panorama Effect. It's an instantaneous overview effect, instantaneous awareness of what being on this planet means. This awareness is the only way, like the alligator plants in this sense, or the Espada de São Jorge, and you kill the dragon, like the alligator plants, it's dystopia. That's what has to be done now with climate changes. An example of the Amazon and the Atlantic forest that's around Paraty, the Atlantic forest, which in this introduction was presented so beautifully in the introduction, that in Amazon, we still have a large amount of utopia, the utopia of life. And in Paraty, we had or would have, but only 4% of the Atlantic forest. The dystopia is reaching us. And when we look at the earth from outside, as occurred with Socrates more than 2,000 years ago, if we could leave and look at the world from outside and contemplate the earth from outside, we would acknowledge the grandeur of the world. So I don't know if I've answered your question concerning who protects the plants, but the consciousness is the only way of us to protect ourselves from dystopia.
And Protection for Dark Times. That's the name of this work behind me, of Juliana Stasaki. What are the magical powers of your sword, St. James sword? In your case, it's a pen. It is the word. It may be just your computer. Is that your protection for dark ages or times?
Is this a question for me? Oh, okay. Okay, so probably the answer you were looking for is that it is people who are destroying the Amazon, and therefore people also have to protect the Amazon from people. So being a human being is a mixed bag. We're very wonderful on the one hand, and we are pretty awful on the other. And when you say to people, "Be human," that's actually a double-bladed sword. So Brazil has this huge natural system. It produces an enormous amount of oxygen. The oceans produce even more. If we kill the oceans, we will have a lot of trouble breathing, because our oxygen supply will be diminished by approximately 60%. So it's not just because things are beautiful that we need to protect them. It's because they are essential to our life. So if you wish to have a human species, I'm still in favor of it. But if you wish to have one, you have to protect that which allows us to live. It's just a mistake to think that human beings are separate from nature. Nature is in you. Every time you take a breath, you are breathing in nature. You are breathing in oxygen that has been produced by the natural system. And before there were photosynthesizing plants, the atmosphere was not an oxygen atmosphere, it was a methane atmosphere. It was plants that changed the atmosphere to the kind of air that we breathe today. So this is just a matter of the survival of us. And if we don't grasp that, we're going to be gone. So I say to young people, this isn't my problem. It's going to be your problem, though. Say, I'm going to be dead. They say, no, you're not. I say, yes, I am. So cute.
Bem, o livro de poemas
Well, the poetry, Dearly Poems, was written between 2008 and 2019. The Portuguese translation is from a poet who's also a physician, João Barreto Guimarães. And in Portuguese, it's called Affectionately, Afetuosamente.
Oh, very nice.
This is a cover, and there's a bird on the cover. So Margaret brings in the memory of the poems she wrote in the 50s. And it says that many people close to her have died and that she has grown old. And she talks about poetry as the center of human life: life, death, weather, time, sadness, joy. But I have to think about these verses. Many things that are not what you want arrive in the disguise of flowers: lotus feet, the petals, broken bones. So I would like to hear from you, Margaret, these things that come in disguise of flowers, because we need to have some level of maturity to understand that there are many layers, and many of these layers are invisible, like in the flowers or the plants, and that we have to really pay attention to these things to be able to recognize them.
It's a very strange question. What are you asking?
I guess I'm asking you about these things that are in the center, the core of poetry: life, death, maturity, time, what is invisible and what comes to us in disguise. How can you describe poetry, and how do they come to us disguised of flowers?
It's kind of impossible to answer. So I think what is being said is that poetry is at the heart of language. So poets are always remaking language. As for flowers, they're always evanescent. So they're always transitory. And one reason that the Japanese are so passionate about the cherry blossom festival is that that is what it represents. It represents moments of time that are then gone. So if you think about your life, it's the same with you, except we happen to be living at a slower pace than the pace that flowers live at. So we are not, just as we are not apart from nature, we are not apart from time, and we are not apart from these cycles of life. So this is who we are. We like to think that we are above it all, and we are human beings that can transcend nature, time, and circumstance, and exist in some kind of platonic super universe. But there is no evidence of that. So you, me, here, now. This is our moment of time. This is now. 5 minutes from now, this will be then. And so it is with flowers, except we see it more directly with flowers. We say this flower is a bud, this flower is opening, this flower is blooming, this flower is wilting, this flower is gone. And with some flowers, that can be one night. But that's a bit gloomy. Enjoy the flowers while they're there.
Sim, e é verdade que o cheiro das
It's also
flores
true that the scent of flowers we can't see, but we can feel it, and we are touched by the different scents. So there are different elements that we are unable to see, but we are able to feel the presence of, and it has an impact on who we are and what we represent in the world.
That's true. Yes, one of the
nas suas
things about
intervenções põe em evidência
Antonio, when you talk about the evidences of a confrontation, on one hand, you have love as a force of coming together, and then a failure of all the organs that we are living in the planet. So this would just corroborate a perception that the original peoples, the natives, have, in terms that nature is all about collaboration, and you have to have zero tolerance into egotism. And the title of a poetry book that Margaret wrote it's called affectionately in Portuguese, because Antonio is not embarrassed at all of using the word love and science and nature. How do words love, collaboration, why are these words being used anymore? Why are they almost bad
Okay,
words?
it's a long story,
Mm.
Anabela. I think that this perspective, it's difficult to talk with a lot of scientists. I've issued a plea to my colleagues that we need to redirect the orientations of 5 centuries back that let us be divorced and alienated from the world. As a scientist, I could say, I can look at the center of the sun and know how it was calculated, which made up of trillions of tons of hydrogen that it turns into helium and gives off energy. This is fusion, and per se, it has a mystery. It's a mystery. It's an enigma, a riddle. It's obvious that it comes from the atom's nucleus, but it doesn't really need a more expansive explanation. Nevertheless, we don't have to go to the center of the sun, nor can we even go there. We can only go with our ideas to go to the center of the sun with our calculations, but we can embrace a person that we love and feel the proximity of the hearts beating together like a cardiac Wi-Fi, instantaneous communication using bypass. I'm speaking Anglo-Portuguese, which bypasses the analysis, the cold intellectual analysis. The cold intellectual analysis is uncoupled from and disconnected from the body itself. When we have our intellect very activate, we forget to go to the bathroom, we forget to eat, we forget to sleep. And this is a reaction in natural terms. It's total aberration. Why? Because the body is a mother. The body sustains all activity, intellectual activity, in the brain even. And to forget your body, it's no different. Picking up on your clue, it's no different from you forgetting Gaia, that you forget the world, you forget the flowers. As Margaret was saying, you didn't even see the flowers. You go directly by it, you ignore them, you're too busy. And you have to be concerned with children, little things. And I've had this discourse with a scientific angle to it, because science, if it it presents as a quest for truth, and the truth cannot be limited to the method. It cannot be limited to dogmas, whether even scientific dogma. So when I talk about love, I'm talking about this energy, this fusion energy, which can go back to over the course of history of humankind. The French Revolution, for example, you had liberté, égalité, and fraternité. And liberté produced liberalism, and égalité produced socialism, communism, and fraternité hasn't arrived yet. It's there. It's still coming, because now people are talking about multiple organ failure in the Gaia's body, and now we can't go without oxygen. Things in Canada itself this summer, it was over 50 degrees Celsius in Canada. So a lot of bad things are going to happen before we run out of oxygen. It's going to become, scientists have the perception of this. You find scientists with psychological problems. The scientists who work with the climate issue, they have psychological problems. A lot of them are going for treatment because humankind doesn't believe, it doesn't listen, or at least hasn't listened so far. It doesn't perceive the insanity, as if the dystopia has become a matrix because it's become invisible. As in the series, in the trilogy, the Hollywood trilogy, reality, this reality that threatens us, and it's not going to remove oxygen, but also water and comfort. It is invisible because people continue to believe that everything is fine and dandy and business as usual, and they've lost this connection. So if you have fraternité, if you hug a tree and you lie on the ground and embrace Gaia, as Ailton Krenak, the indigenous leader in Brazil, in a poetic verse that he said, if you lie on the earth, on the grass, on the ground of the forest and you embrace Gaia, and Gaia's energy brings us this reconnection that we've lost through this aberration, which in my understanding is human. I study nature. Nature, when I observe organisms, I see perfection. Not that the organisms are perfect, but the connections that these organisms make according to the natural law. And natural law has very strong this element of fraternité. Collaboration is totally omnipresent in nature. If you take a cell, your cell, or that of a plant or a fungus, which is a eukaryotic with their numerous different organelles, and a complete cell in biochemistry itself, a sky, if you look at how this was formed, it's in symbiosis. And Margaret explained the process of intimate fusion and union. That's why love is so important, and love shouldn't be a corny topic, or we should not have difficulty to talk about love, especially scientists, because it is a force for reclaiming in each person who loves, ever since your pet all the way to another human being, and people who love being alive and loving being on earth should be able to talk about this without qualms whatsoever. On the contrary.
Margaret, in your creative universe, there is a fundamental issue which has to do with reproduction, the survival of the species. In the bestseller Handmaid's Tale, O Conto da Aya, in Portuguese, the translation is the story of Portuguese from Portugal. It is a different title than the Portuguese from Brazil. But so the reproduction is the center to tackle issues such as power, totalitarian systems, fanatism, biblical texts, women's rights, and offered the handmaid. She doesn't have her own existence. Her existence is to procreate. So the basic issue is fertility, because this will guarantee the transmission of a legacy. And during this flip, we're talking about dry land and the difficulties that the planet is living. Plants, flora, and the mythology will continuously give us an idea of future, of life. And to write, I ask you, is it also a way of being fertile to give birth?
Well, I'm here to tell you, books are not like babies. I've had both. So, it's people sometimes make that analogy, but it's not a good one. So Handmaid's Tale is really just dialing back about 150 years to what things were like before the mid-20th century for women, and particularly when put in a fundamentalist religious frame, this kind of thing would be the result. You can see it now coming into being in Texas. So controlling women's bodies is a way of controlling women, and that is something that not just totalitarianisms, but patriarchal societies in general have always wanted to do. So come the totalitarianism, Anabela, I'm sorry, but you will not have a job anymore.
Bom, eu fui procurar num dicionário.
I went to look up in the dictionary the meaning of utopia and dystopia. A utopia is a concept created by Thomas Morris in the 16th century, as we know, and it means, in the Greek origin of the word, o topo, the place that does not exist. John Stewart also popularized the term dystopia, which designates an unfortunate place filled with difficulties. So it's a contrary of utopia, where there is no suffering, disease, oppression. So Margaret created a word that is the osmosis between these two words. It's utopia and dystopia, which is Ustopia. And I would like to hear from you a bit about this word, Ustopia, and the meaning that you give to Ustopia. But also, I would like to know what would you say to life? What is the synonym of life for you, Margaret?
Synonym. What do you mean? Let's go to your first question
Vamos
first.
para a sua primeira pergunta primeiro. Vamos responder
Yeah.
a primeira. So, utopia and
Yes.
dystopia.
So-
Ustopia.
So they're two halves of the same thing. Every dystopia contains a little utopia, by which the characters in the bad society are measuring the badness of it. They have an idea of something better. And if you look in each of these literary dystopias, you will find embedded in it the idea of a better society. Also, in every utopia, there is a little dystopia embedded in it. Either it's the idea of the society that has existed before theirs when everything was quite bad. The 19th century wrote a lot of books like that because they felt they had the problems of poverty, exploitation of workers, inequality, pollution, and something called the woman question. They were very keen on the woman question. They wrote about it a lot. So we find ourselves in an improved society, such as William Morris's News from Nowhere. Everything has been fixed, but we're remembering the bad society that came before, namely his own 19th century society. So these two things are very connected in literary works, but also in real life attempts to make utopias. The 19th century wrote a lot of utopias. The 20th century stopped writing them because people had tried it in real life and it had not worked out very well. So the USSR came in as a utopia. So did Mao's China. So did Pol Pot. So we're going to make everything wonderful. It's all going to be perfect. But first we have to get rid of those people. And that has been the real life pattern. So people stopped writing utopias. But I think they're going to come back to giving it an attempt again. Because we need models of how we can live differently. In fact, we have to have models of how we can live differently if we are going to reverse the processes that are leading to advanced climate change. So we have to think about these things because we have to start using different materials. We have to build a different material society, and we have to start living differently ourselves.
Yes. And I would like to ask if you have any memory from your childhood that you would like to share with us, and that might give us an image, an understanding of utopia, a happy utopic world.
Well, nobody has grown up in a perfect world. So I grew up during World War II. It was not perfect. But at the same time, I grew up amongst the biologists. My father was a forest entomologist, so I did grow up in the Canadian forest for quite a large part of my childhood. And I think the perspective that gives you is that there are many different ways to live. So you don't actually have to live in a modern house with a lot of clothing. You know, that's not actually necessary. One of the things that I think Antonio and I would agree on is that we must involve the perspective of indigenous people if we are going to be able to reverse the quite mechanistic, technological civilization that we find ourselves in. people often say, are we going to be able to invent our way out of this crisis? Well, partly yes, we will have to invent our way out of it. But we also have to look at societies from a different perspective. One of the problems of our moment right now is that too much wealth is concentrated in the hands of too few people, and they seem to be in a wealth competition with one another. So how much more money can they accumulate? This is not actually helpful.
Pode
Yes.
falar de.
So could you talk a little bit about literature, native, Canadian native literature, this learning with the different storytelling and narratives of the native peoples? Is this something that you follow? Have you always been interested in? What is your
Okay.
contact with this
There-
literature?
Yeah, there is no always. So the books and poems and plays by First Nations people, those come onto the scene in the 1980s. So before that time, for instance, when I was writing a book about Canadian literature in 1972, we looked and looked and looked and looked, although there were First Nations people in stories, those stories were not by them. So one of the things about literature and writing is you have to have people who want to do it. The writers don't just appear. You have to have a matrix, if you like, an ecology that is favorable to their appearing. You can certainly extinguish a literature. You can shoot all the writers and put them in the gulag. That's been done before. But conversely, to have them appear, you have to create a positive environment for that. And that has happened since the 1980s, but not much before at all. So you're looking at a very new literature, and you're looking at people exploring issues in literature that were known to them, but not written about. And you're also dealing with a traumatic history. So it's like a lot of places, but I think more particularly in North America, you had two European powers, England and France, competing, and to the south, of course, Spain. And but when England and France were competing in the 17th and 18th centuries, they made allies amongst First Nations, treated them as equals, and valued them. And they were also very necessary for the fur trade and whaling. Okay, so economic value, made alliances, treated them as equals, respect, etc. The balance of power in the 17th century was definitely on the side of the indigenous people. They could have wiped out the Europeans quite easily if they had wished to do that. But then the wars come to an end. New France gets conquered by the British, and they're no longer interested in the fur trade. They want agriculture. That's when they start pushing indigenous people off their land. So that created a whole history that was bad, and then a silence. So it is the breaking of that silence that you have seen beginning in the 1980s. So that's what you will, if you were looking at writing by Indigenous people in Canada today, a lot of it is going to be about trauma. So trauma created by residential school system, trauma created by people taking land, basically land appropriation and stealing in some instances. And you've got conflicts right now that are about things like pipelines. And you have ongoing situations that are about things like lack of access to clean drinking water, fundamental things. And although some communities are very wealthy because they've got natural resources that are valuable. Others are very poor. So a lot of inequality there too. So these are the issues that you will find being treated, as well as historical ones, going back into time, writing about things that happened in the past. And it's very vigorous right now. There are a large number of writers. They're very enthusiastic. They have an audience. Publishers are interested in them. So it's a sort of it's a very fermenting, vigorous activity that's going on right now.
Eu vou sublinhar.
I would just like to highlight two words. One is trauma, and then rupture, breaking the silence that you referred to. It seems to be important. So there's also a conversation with the native populations of thought that Antonio will keep and treat and talk about for some time. It is a very careful listening to the magnificent sound made of acts and words, shadow, light, which Caetano Veloso, the Brazilian singer, sings in the song O Índio. So what remains? Do we have just to learn with the plants? And now looking a little bit back at what we were talking about before, and Margaret and I were talking about the definition of utopia and dystopia. What meanings would Antonio find in this? Because one thing is the meaning, the etymological meaning of that we can look up in any dictionary, and it's different to think about the meaning that a creator, that a writer such as Margaret would bring and find in time and giving to each one of these words. And it's different what in your research, in your work, throughout the years will represent utopia and dystopia. So these are many questions here, but I would like to look back into this utopia and dystopia.
Okay, thank you for that, and very welcome your statement just now. And we're drawing near the end. I want to leave a message here that's extremely important. Human beings have utopia and dystopia inside them, and taking a literary or poetic license to use two terms in different contexts, utopia and dystopia, but appealing to the goodwill of listeners here, who people are reading and listening, that they are as if they were metaphors. The discovery of the microbiome in our digestive system, microbiome with more than 1,000 species, depending on the human being and depending on the diet, microbiome is an example of this utopia. We have an assembly of microorganisms that allow us to live. A study done in the Atlantic forest here around Paraty found under the leaves of the trees 3 million species of bacteria. Species, not 3 million cells, 3 million species of bacteria. A study performed in the Czech Republic showing in the soil of the forest there in the Czech Republic, 1 square meter, under that square meter, you had 5,000 kilometers of hyphae, of fungi. The fungi are engineers of the ecosystems. The bacteria are micro manipulators of atoms and molecules. There's not a single snowflake or ice crystal or a drop of water that is formed in the atmosphere that doesn't have a bacteria inside manipulating it. This is in fact their meetings, because we aren't aware of this. Science is bringing this to light. I'm going to reach the indigenous peoples because science needed armamentarium of tools and reductionist developments to take a photograph of bacteria and the fungi, and to understand that the animals are forest gardeners. They aren't predators. They're collaborating. Even the ones that they kill, they have an extremely advanced and evolved system of cooperation. And we've talked about this already today. And this reality, which little by little reaches through when we talk about science and dystopia. If dystopia predominates, we're going to lose this living being, which is Gaia. And that's where I reach and listen to, one day I heard from Davi Kaponawa, a Yanomami Indian, a chant, a song of the indigenous people, unlike perhaps many indigenous peoples in Canada and here in the Amazon. And it lasted long. The absence of European contact with the Yanomami indigenous people here in the Amazon, so they may have preserved a few things like this. He said the following: is, are human beings whites, the white people, do they not know that when they wake up, the forest is going to stop raining? And when it stops raining, they're going to have either water to drink or food to eat. It's mathematical elegance, because he summarized and synthesized in one phrase what science took 20 years with supercomputers, laboratories, aircraft, boats and towers, and all kinds of tools, and thousands of scientists to reach the conclusion that he already had. And he reached this conclusion without having to destroy the forest that he lived in and had for thousands of years. So, in brief, is what the Indians do. They have a fable, a synthesis, which has the elegance of the mathematical equation, the most powerful mathematical equation to explain phenomena. We need them not only from Canada and other indigenous peoples as well, in order to do a quick reading, an integrative reading of the holism that we've lost with reductionism, without, on the other hand, lose everything that science. We wouldn't be holding flip online if it weren't for our computers or with internet. So I don't want to underrate science in that sense. This has been a cycle of union, which is fantastic, with indigenous peoples and science, where science brings clarification and explanation. We have a number of collect bacteria, fungi from plants and animals, and oxygen, et cetera, et cetera. And the indigenous peoples do an instant reading of that. They look at it and say, look, this, that, and the other is happening. And we need to have this union for the good of our survival, for the continuity on our continuity on the planet. If we don't do this, the dystopia underway, this matrix, which is not real in the concrete world, but it's real inside people's minds, as taught by Noam Chomsky from MIT. This matrix is devouring us. It's devouring our society, our culture, our existence, and together with it's taking the extinction of species in America. And the last thing I'm going to say, Janet Bennett, a biologist, she wrote, Bennett, in the 1990s, a book called The Secrets of Nature. In other words, today, this reading, picking up on what Margaret said concerning biology and being inspired by nature, as Janine Bennett teaches, to reinvent our technology, to submit it to this beauty, this goodness, and the generosity of nature that the indigenous peoples are able to grasp so well. This process can perhaps bring, who knows, and here I go back again to the theme of love, a cure for trauma. I was an indigenous tribe in the Mohawks in Canada in 1992. I visited the Mohawks. They had a clash with the Quebec police because they were taking a sacred area of the Mohawks, and the Mohawks from the United States, in several different places, they came from other places to fight against the invasion of a sacred territory there. I spent several days with them, the Mohawks, and I remember that they still had, despite the fact that they were all blue collar, they were blue collar workers, they were distant from their origins. There was a record, like in our indigenous peoples here in South America, the register that can be reclaimed. And so the union is the secret I see, and it's a secret with the new utopia which can be born from it. It is not fantastic, and the utopia could be a fantasy. It's been here for billions of years. It's produced this utopia. It's the matrix, but we don't know it, and we aren't aware of it. Nevertheless, we're breathing without stop ever since we are born, and our body functions very well. Thank you, and I'll stop there. Thank you. So
We are
we're
in the
here in the
last
last 5 minutes.
and I would like to bring José Saramago, a Nobel Portuguese award winner, and he launched the 100 years of the birth of José Saramago, in 1997, he writes, today in Lazarote, reading a paper while I was standing in the sun, I had news from the universe. I heard from the universe. The increase of the temperatures will extinguish all forms of life. The oceans will evaporate. It will be a grandiose end of a party, and it will be a Wagnerian, it will be Dantesque. And it continues. So this excerpt is from 1997, and The Handmaid's Tale by Ms. Atwood is from 1985. So it is this whole conversation about climate change came much later, about oppressing systems. Is that a premonition, Ms. Atwood?
Oh, well, people have been talking about species extinction. I mean, biologists have been talking about it at least since the 50s. I can remember it at the dinner table. So biologists have known for quite a long time. In fact, you can go and look at the Club of Rome back in 1972, and they said if we keep doing the things that we're doing, in 50 years we're going to be here. And we did keep doing those things, and here we are. So it's the problem is that politicians are very short-term thinkers. They're thinking always about how to get elected again. And it is going to have to be the general public, and you can already see signs of that changing with this new Greta Thunberg generation. It's going to have to be the general public that lets the politicians know that unless they act, they're not going to be elected. But it's a multiple problem, because you have to show the people that this isn't going to mean that they won't have a job. And that is where most people live. They live, can I live in a house? Can I eat food? I mean, they're not up in a cloud palace somewhere. They're on the earth, and they have problems living their daily lives. So you're going to have to deal with it on that level, or they will not be convinced. I would just like to add a little note in here of thank you, because I've been watching the sign language interpreters who have been working very, very hard. Thank you very much. I appreciate what you are doing, both of you, and it seems to be very strenuous work because you have to trade off. You have to take turns. It's amazing what you do. Sorry, that's an aside. Yeah, so that is our problem. It's a big problem. Luckily, a lot of the people are now thinking about it, and there have been some amazing new inventions addressed specifically towards changing the material build of how we live that has been producing all of these greenhouse gases and climate change problems. For instance, we can now make building bricks out of mushrooms. No cement involved. We have a new membrane that can cut the cost of air conditioning by 80%, with no moving parts and no energy involved. So these new things are coming on stream. The question is, will it be fast enough? If we'd started back in 1972, we wouldn't be in this predicament now. But we didn't, because we're such short-term thinkers, and apparently we need forest fires and floods and droughts to make us pay attention.
Bom, eu tenho
So
pena.
it's just very sad that we haven't had the time to talk about hope. We haven't talked about hope yet. We talked about the difficulties, our concerns, our issues, our the threats. Maybe we could end on, I wish we could have ended on a higher note, talking about hope, because hope is what will want us, make us wake up the next day. So what brings you hope, Miss Atwood?
I think human beings have hope. I think hope comes with the package. So if we don't have hope, we stop trying. And those of our distant ancestors who did not have any hope are not our ancestors. So because they didn't get up in the morning to chase the gazelle, they had no hope. So I think we have hope as human beings. The problem is we should try not to have unjustified hope, and we should try to work towards having more hope. So we should build on the hope we have, and in such a way that things become more hopeful, so that we justify our hope. So you wake up in the morning and you think, shall I get out of bed? No, why bother? It's not an accomplishment.
Yes, you're right. So thank you so much, Margaret Atwood, Antonio Nobre. It was a pleasure to talk to you. We could stay here for hours on end. However, our time to flourish, going back to the plants and the flowers. For now, we end our conversation now. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you.